This week on Conservative Crossroads, should there be fewer or more limits on foreign students and staff at American universities? P Greene says there should be more limits. Daniel Martino says there should be fewer limits. Coming up on Conservative Crossroads now. Welcome back to Conservative Crossroads, the podcast where conservatives lean into their differences rather than deny them. My name's Henry Olson, Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and the host and moderator for this program. Today we have an interesting and fantastic topic. Should there be fewer or more limits on the number of foreign students and staff that are permitted at U.S. universities and encouraged to stay after their education? P Greene, Senior Fellow at the Defense of Freedom Institute, says there should be more limits. Daniel Martino, Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, says there should be fewer. As is usual on this program, each person will have a 5-minute period to make opening statements, and then they will mutually question one another for about 40 minutes. They will then have 2 minutes each to give a closing statement delivered in reverse order. Given that we don't have a yes-no topic today, we have a fewer versus more, I'm going to simply make the decision, and I'm going to put Daniel Martino first to say fewer, followed by P Greene to argue for more. Daniel, you're up.
So the reason that there should be fewer limits on foreign students is, first, there are already no limits on the numerical or the amount or the number of students enrolled at U.S. colleges from abroad. So let's start with that status quo. That status quo has led to approximately only 3% of the American undergraduate population being a foreign student. That is not what you are told usually on the news when we're talking about the crisis of foreign students in American colleges. At the graduate level, it's a much more substantial, around 10% of students. And depending on certain universities, some of them are what we would call degree mills. Those are universities catered to foreign students. And there are certainly costs associated with this, but there are also a lot of benefits that we don't discuss. Number one, because most enrollees are at public universities charge out-of-state tuition to foreign students, bringing in billions to American universities from abroad. It is one of the largest exports of the United States, international education. So Americans benefit by the fact that money is flowing in from abroad to pay and employ hundreds of thousands of Americans, over 300,000, that work at these universities. Number two, it's an issue of selection. What kind of immigrant does America want? Certainly immigrants that speak English, immigrants that are going to earn money and not depend on welfare, immigrants that are not going to commit crimes. And turns out that through the American university system, foreign students are the best way to select who gets to stay and who gets to go, because by coming to America and being exposed during their education, they can try to apply for jobs. Employers are exposed to them. They pick the ones that want to sponsor to remain, and those who don't leave, which is the majority of them. But by selecting from the university system, you get the advantage of testing them. This is a group of the population that commits essentially no crime. And while there are also risks, right? You will hear about spies, you will hear about stealing of intellectual property and things related to this. The truth is that is extremely minimal and present with all immigration categories. If you think China is not paying American-born citizens, you're not looking at what's really happening. And of course, everybody who is a conservative should support limits on spies, on eliminating that. We should try to stop anybody who is a CCP agent or CCP member, right? That's not what you want to welcome into any Western country. But it's also true that we don't want limits on anybody who is not a security threat. As it works now, the system has benefited Americans tremendously. The truth is, if we reduce the number of foreign students in American colleges, thousands of colleges could end up closing. We're already in a demographic disaster. We will lose many jobs, American jobs, and we would select immigrants in a much worse way. How else are we going to select immigrants? Through family ties, through luck? If anything, we need to make the system more welcoming of the exact type of immigrant that would make a good American and would benefit the American economy. And what would that mean? Well, there's already some slight benefits through the H-1B system for foreign students, but there should be more. How could we do that? Well, the immigration system, instead of selecting through family ties, it should select through employment, which would overwhelmingly benefit foreign students in the United States. A different way would be actually what President Trump has done. The H-1B fee applies only to people coming from abroad, not from American colleges. So actually, President Trump has mechanically, even if not intentionally, benefited foreign students through the H-1B fee by allowing them to be exempted from that. And I think the final question here is, there will be a lot of arguments in this debate about whether foreign students take the spots of American students. The evidence says the opposite. Because foreign students pay much more in tuition, the reality is that they subsidize American students who receive scholarships from this tuition revenue. The MBA programs and the foreign students in undergrad programs are the cash cow of American universities. And if you have a problem with the American university system, foreign students are not the way to fix it. It's the education regulations. And I agree that there are problems with American universities. They're just not caused by the foreign students, but by our own American woke bureaucrats. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Daniel. Jay, it's your turn.
Thanks for having me on this show. It's wonderful talking with Daniel about these issues. So let me first acknowledge that foreign students and staff contribute valuable skill, knowledge, and energy to U.S. higher education. So they are beneficial. But like with everything in public policy, it's a question of balance. We have to balance that benefit against other risks and dangers that those people may pose. And it's important to keep in mind that at universities, personnel is policy. Who is there helps shape the values and priorities of those institutions. And American universities have a traditional mission to educate American leaders. They're the leaders of American corporations, the leaders of American governmental institutions, cultural institutions, all come from our university system, particularly our selective universities. And so the type of education, the type of values that they're exposed to matters. And while foreign students and staff bring valuable skills, they also bring with them either an indifference to, they're more likely to be indifferent to American political institutions or even hostile than American students. And the reason for this is that they don't grow up here educated in the American political system, and on average are less likely to be familiar with the characteristics of the American political system and its values. And so on average, if you dramatically increase the numbers of foreign students and staff at universities, you will begin to reorient those institutions away from an embrace of the American political system and its values, and more towards either indifference or outright hostility. And so to maintain a balance, we have to keep some limits. And the reason why we have to keep some limits is that currently we have no limits on foreigners entering American higher education. So the number of F1 visas that can be issued is uncapped. As many can come as want to come. And it's not very difficult to find an American university that will admit you. There is someone somewhere that will take everyone. And so of all the people around the world, if they want to come and work and stay in the US, the easiest way in that is completely unlimited is with an F1 visa. Now, the bulk of them, 2/3 of the F1 visas, are in graduate school. They are not undergraduate. So it's important to think of them really as workers running the universities, not as students. Graduate students do all the basic operations of universities. They teach the intro classes, they run the labs, they do all the stuff that faculty are supposed to do, but decided they don't want to do anymore. So they have essentially cheap foreign workers, essentially the grape pickers of higher education that they've imported into graduate school to run universities. And so the university enrollment in graduate school is increasingly foreign, especially in our selective universities. In the Ivy League, for example, it's pushing half of the graduate enrollment is from abroad. And so these institutions have shifted very heavily towards a global rather than an American perspective. In addition, as Daniel pointed out, we have facilitated the movement from F1 visa into H-1B visa in universities. Not only is there no fee for H-1B if you convert from F-1 to H-1B, but also the number of H-1Bs that universities can sponsor is unlimited. And because now it's strictly capped for for-profit companies, there are 85,000 a year. There's a lottery. They're very hard to get, but universities can hire as many H-1B visas as they like. Now, the result of very strictly capping foreigners entering the U.S. in every way but higher education is that we're pushing foreigners into higher education, like squeezing a balloon where they pop out is in higher education. And so it's resulted in 22% of our faculty being foreign-born. 28% of universities have been led by a foreign-born president in the last decade. This shift in the orientation of the universities has altered their priorities. Now, keeping in mind that American universities not only have this traditional mission of helping inculcate American values in future generations, but also are heavily subsidized by the public. If they wish to continue receiving that public subsidy, they're really going to have to address this shift in orientation away from American political values towards global values. And so we have to think of foreign students not simply as economic assets, but as political risks as well.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Daniel. And now we're on to the questioning phase of our program. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Well, first, I agree with a lot of the things you said, even if I reach a different conclusion, Jay. One of the things that I think you mentioned, but I wonder if you agree with me on this. You mentioned that the mission is to educate American leaders, but would you agree that it's also a good thing if America influences foreign leaders?
It is, but and interestingly, the design of the F-1 visa historically was that we would import a modest number of elites from abroad who would receive higher education in the US and then go home. They would go home and we would export our values to their countries. But at critical mass, when the total foreign enrollment in the Ivy League is a third, okay, and in graduate school,
graduate programs,
and the reason for that this matters is that rather than inculcating foreigners and American values, we are now inculcating American students in foreign values.
Okay, so let's talk about
the purpose of the F-1 visa.
So let's talk about the grad programs then, because it is about the grad programs at the undergrad level. Even in the Ivy League, at least I know about Columbia's numbers is like under 10%. But at the grad level, you're right, is high. I'll tell you my experience doing a PhD in economics at Columbia. From knowing the admissions process and talking with the people there, the truth is Americans barely apply to PhD programs in this country. It's not even that they're being rejected, it's that the number of applications is very low. So if we say, okay, then don't admit foreign students, then it simply means just don't graduate people in this case.
So let me be clear. I'm not talking about banning. I'm just talking about imposing limits. So I think a very reasonable limit would be something like 15% of total enrollment at an institution from abroad. Seems like a reasonable limit. That would actually leave most universities unaffected. But among our elite universities that are training most of our future leaders, we are well above the 15% of total enrollment, not of undergraduate, but of total enrollment. Now, as to the relative mix, why are there so many applicants from abroad for grad school relative to Americans? And the reason is because the compensation. So, and remember, grad students are as workers, and very often they're being paid stipends. And not generating tuition revenue. And also, I should emphasize that elite universities, tuition as a whole is not very material, and especially tuition from graduate students is really not material.
Well, tuition from MBAs is pretty material at the business schools as a source of.
At the business school, sure, but for Columbia or for Harvard,
for the Columbia business school,
graduate tuition from foreigners is not an important source of their total revenue. But the reason why foreigners are so attracted to this is because they want into the U.S. And they want into the US because it's great here. And I love the fact that it's great here. And I totally understand why they want to get in here. But they're willing to endure basically really subpar wages, living 6 to a shared house in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which stinks. I can tell you from personal experience. And so Americans look at that and they think, I'd rather go into finance.
Okay, so I'll disagree there. And I disagree there in part because I was also a grad student on a stipend. And so it's not true. It's 6 in a house or whatever. It was 3 in our case as roommates.
Okay.
But that's a common Manhattan thing, to be fair. It has nothing to do with being necessarily grad student. And the stipends, in my opinion, were pretty fine for a PhD in economics. In fact, if you ask most people, they don't know that PhDs are free and they come with a stipend. They think that you have to pay for them. Most Americans have asked me that. I'm like, oh, how much did you pay? And I'm like, I never paid $1. They paid me. And so I think there's an information issue here. Americans are actually much more likely to go into programs that are actually very expensive and go into programs that don't pay off, such as those in the social sciences than in STEM. So I don't think it's a stipend issue. I think it's a preference issue too. And certainly it's true what you say about, they want access to the United States, obviously. I don't see that as a bad thing. The question is...
The F1 visa is for, right? The F1 visa is not an immigration route. It was designed to bring in a small number of foreign elites.
Well, but this is a normative question. It's what it should be for, right? If it should be for the benefit of the United States, I'm making a case here. My case is it's good if they learn and they like America and they go back. It's also good if they like America, they are productive workers and they stay. Both things can be beneficial to the United States.
So the question is, how do I understand your argument for meritocratic selection, that the kind of attractive thing about having higher education as the primary conduit for 1 million foreigners with F1 visas, 1.2 million coming in. So there are 2 problems with that. One is that we're not selecting them. They're selecting themselves. Okay, now there's a little bit of there's a little bit of positive selection in that they have to be able to enroll in a university, so they have to have some resources, and they have to be able to speak well enough.
Yeah.
But otherwise, there's no limit on their ability to come in. They select themselves in. There is a college or university in the U.S. that will take them, so they're basically purchasing their way in. Okay.
Well, that's a lot of positive selection, Jay, purchasing the...
It's some positive selection, but they are choosing themselves. While if Google or Amazon were hiring them, then U.S. employers would be choosing them for their skills.
Yes.
But universities are not choosing them.
I agree. But they only get to stay if the employer chooses them for their skills, which is my entire argument, right? I don't want them to stay if an employer does not select them.
Because they don't have to go from the university to Google. They can get into the university and stay at the university. That's my whole point, is they never leave the university at a shockingly high rate because the university can hire them without limit in an H-1B visa upon completion.
But the university's hire is for professors, and that's fine.
No, staff of all kinds.
All kinds of staff. Yeah, that's true. But even as you mentioned, I mean, despite our incredible immigration law preferences for university hiring of immigrants, it's under a quarter of the staff is foreign, which is less than Silicon Valley that has all the limits, right? So it's not really the case. My concern, which is, I think, one you share, is people like Mahmoud Khalil that are perpetual students, like 10 years as an undergrad. I'm sorry, like even for grad school, that's too much. That their actual goal is to undermine the United States. That has to end, of course.
So there are 2 different types that would be worrisome. There's the kind of type of foreigner who comes in who's really just indifferent to American political values, that doesn't know anything about them, doesn't really care, okay? And that's actually fairly common. I think the number of active saboteurs, hostile, is small, but they're extra dangerous. So when the total number of foreigners in higher education. So F1 visas, it's 1.2 million students. When
Yeah, but the actual number of students is about 800 and something thousand now, by the way. It's fallen. I just looked it up. It's because you were counting people on OPT who are workers.
Well, but I think we have to count them. But I'll get to that. But it's so with it's 1.2 million with an F1 visa. OPT also has F1 visa. So we'll talk about that in a second. But with 1.2 million people with an F1 visa, and we have to worry about fat tails. So a tail of radicals begins to get large enough that they can make actual trouble. Okay, because there's a critical mass of them, particularly in elite institutions where the total percentage of foreigners is a third of the institution. So it's a very
don't you think that those universities select on purpose those radicals? It's not really about the number of foreigners, it's about those specific people.
So the problem is that as an economist, I'm sure you'll appreciate that when an item is not scarce, there's no rationing of it.
Yeah, but I think that they're high up in the priority list. I think if you put the cap and it binds in Colombia, they're still going to select for Mahmoud Khalil.
So when foreigners, when there's no limit on F1 visas, universities have no reason to engage in any due diligence about who they are. We don't care. We just take them. They come in. They are great pickers. It's fantastic. It's cheap, wonderful labor for them. It costs nothing or is free to them, and costs nothing or is cheap for them. And but if we were to impose a cap of, let's say, 15% of the institution could be from abroad, then universities would actually engage in due diligence.
But you were saying that they don't do due diligence, but their admission rate is very low. This is not like a free range where they just admit people and they want cheap labor. They have a very low admissions rate. So they do due diligence. The problem is that their diligence is that they want to select radicals, and that's an entirely different problem, an education, not an immigration problem.
So in graduate schools, the limit is only the number of stipends that they have. That's the only limit. In programs where they offer stipends, now in many programs, they'll have a 2-class system, people with stipends and people not. And foreigners will take the ones not. And another odd characteristic of the F1 visa is that it prevents those foreign students from working anywhere but at their university.
Yes.
Now, they work at their universities because they want to make some money, either because their stipends are low and they're trying to supplement, or because they don't have a stipend and have some costs, and they have no other way of earning an income. They can't work anywhere else, so they work at their universities. So this is a captured pool.
Well, I'm in favor of eliminating the restriction
that is staffing universities.
I'm in favor, and by the way, this is part of my answer, right? I don't think immigrants should be captured at higher education. I think it's a problem that higher education is given a benefit over, say, Silicon Valley. I would want to reduce the restrictions so that they can be more likely to start a business and select more entrepreneurs rather than people focused on higher education.
So we may have some agreement there, I think, because the odd unintended side effect of strictly capping foreigners entering the labor force in the U.S. in every industry except higher education is steering foreigners into higher education in excessive volumes and altering the character of higher education. And if we made the restrictions level between all other industry and higher education, then there'd be no reason for every smart foreigner to go into academia, and instead they would be going into other industries, and the numbers would come down. And so I'd be perfectly happy with increasing limits on foreigners in higher education to bring them down, and relaxing limits in other industries so that we had higher education and other industry fighting on a more level playing field. So, for example, we have 85,000 H-1B visas available every year for private companies, but no limit on universities. And by the way, with the no limit, the numbers spiked up, which is exactly what you'd expect.
I think the average issuance right now is about 120,000, including those, including nonprofits. So I would agree absolutely with saying we're going to change the cap to 120,000, and we're going to do everybody's included in the cap. and we're going to do a cap. Well, I would prefer a wage ranking, of course.
Sure.
But yes,
I mean, but
I want to level that playing field.
we could optimize how the lottery is done, but it seems like universities should compete in the same lottery as Google. There's no reason for Stanford over Google.
Yes. So that is interesting. It's not just universities, though. It's all nonprofits. So hospitals are actually there, public schools, a lot of other things.
Yes.
There is an argument, though, that the research is one of the greatest outputs here, and that's useful. I think on the issue of values, which is my understanding is your main concern, right?
Yes.
Values issue. Maybe this is my experience. I want to know if you have a different one. But in my experience, it was the native-born Americans that were the most left-wing in my graduate program, because actually the foreigners were more indifferent. And the Americans at graduate schools in the United States are essentially Marxists already.
Sure. So I think the reason why you have that impression is because, again, graduate school is relatively unattractive to native-born Americans, okay? Because it takes a very long time to get a PhD. The stipend while working for that is barely enough to live. And then the expected earnings upon completion is low. The probability of getting jobs in academia is low. It's just not a very attractive career path for native-born Americans. And so smart native-born Americans are drawn towards every other kind of industry and not towards academia. And so who of the native-born Americans will go into PhD programs that you would then encounter them at Columbia? They're crazies, right? So people with high, who assign a high value to pursuing some ideological agenda, they think the low compensation of academia sounds great because they're thrilled that someone's paying them at all, given that they're otherwise socially dysfunctional.
Now, Jay, isn't that an argument in favor of the foreigners, though? Because you're saying that the foreigners who are attracted are the smart ones. They don't hate America. So that's a great selection mechanism.
No, so the problem is that we have overproduction, we have over-enrollment of graduate students in general. And the reason why we have so many is because there's just a huge number of foreigners willing to do it because this is the only way into the US, okay?
So I'll say that number has been falling since the pandemic. Significantly. Like the absolute number of students enrolled, foreign students enrolled in American universities has been...
So the number of F1 visas actually has continued to go up. And so we
can verify if you want right now, because I'm pretty sure it's the number of F1 visas has also fallen. Because even the number of people on OPT is falling. This is all in part since 2019 because of Trump's crackdown, and then the pandemic happened. And
in the Biden administration, they loosened up and it ramped up again.
No, even Chinese students, even during Biden, have continued to fall.
I think Chinese enrollment has relatively begun.
And the issue with Indians, which is the other leading country of origin, is that they face decades-long backlogs for employment-based visas. So I think we should fact check this one.
Right. I have graduate and undergraduate new enrollment.
Okay.
Here in front of me from the Open Doors, which is a State Department source, and the number of graduate students was 120,000 in 2019. It did drop precipitously in 2020 to 66,000, but then spiked back up to 146,000, then 168,000 in 22, then 176,000 in 2023, so much higher than it was in 2019. And then in 24, it drops back down to 150, but still 30,000 higher than it was in 2019. That's just new graduate enrollment.
That's new graduate enrollment.
New graduate enrollment.
Not undergrad included.
The undergrad the undergraduate enrollment has been barely budged in a long time.
So you would agree with me that undergraduate enrollment is not a problem?
I think the numbers are much lower and the concentrations are much less concerning almost everywhere except outside of very selective institutions where it is potentially problematic. So I think undergraduate enrollment is a problem in those institutions, but as a whole is not. And then remember, 2/3 of all F1 visas
But
who are enrolled students are in graduate school.
and so
Yeah.
and so your worry is about values, not economics.
The staff, the people who run universities, which include graduate students,
Yes.
and OPT, which is the optional practical training program, and H-1B visas. These are the three categories.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of those people who eventually converted to having green cards and being citizens over time. But the way they came in was through F1. Okay.
And you think that putting a cap on total enrollment is going to fix that?
It will. So right now, universities have an incentive to enroll as many graduate F1 visa holders as want to come because they're the great pickers who run their universities. If you put a cap on that, they wouldn't admit more Americans. They might actually just have less scut work. They might have less gophers. They might, heaven forbid, actually make the faculty do more work. And I,
But the
the faculty don't want to teach intro classes.
but you also have a problem with the faculty, though, which is foreign. So the faculty would also be affected.
Is increasingly foreign because we've built this pipeline where the only way into the U.S. is in higher ed, and the only way to stay without difficulty is in higher ed. You can move into industry. So all the economic benefits that you were excited about are of people who can move into industry, but they face lots of limits moving from universities into industry, but
Yes.
no limits staying at universities. So they stay. And they're changing, they're restaffing universities and in every kind of position at universities. And now, many of them are perfectly fine, hardworking, good people, but many of them are indifferent to American political systems and values.
But don't you think that the Americans are too? Don't you think that the Americans are too?
So some are, some aren't. I think that
I haven't seen any piece of evidence, for example, that the foreign students are worse when it comes to their views of the United States than the Americans enrolled in their institutions.
So they will certainly be less familiar with. I think that it is
potentially not, because it's a self-selected group of people who came to America. I mean, you would be surprised the little knowledge that people have about their own country.
I understand that, but there is, on average, I understand there's wide variation both among people born in America and people from abroad, but on average, you would expect people to have an affiliation with and feel identity with and have affection for the place where they're born.
Absolutely.
And which is perfectly natural, and I don't, I'm not in any way upset that people would have this very natural orientation. And that's perfectly fine for people who arrive in the United States to have this affection for their home country, which is why we might want to keep it limited enough so that it doesn't create American institutions populated by people with affection for other places, right? That would be unhealthy for Americans.
I would say I find at elite institution, because I think that all of these problems that you mentioned are not a problem at your average state university, at least not related to foreign enrollment. Is that right?
It will be over time. Not yet, because the problem is, remember, we're squeezing this balloon.
Why do you think it will be
tight restrictions everywhere, but in higher ed? And I can tell you from having been on the professor at the University of Arkansas, over time in our Department of Education Reform PhD program in education policy, like half of our students were coming from abroad. And what did Bangladesh care about charter schools in the U.S.? They really didn't, but they just wanted in, and do they know what Arkansas is? No, and don't care. It's a way in. And we right, of course, they prefer being at more selective institutions. That's where they come first. But the other thing is that without limits, the relative skill of the people who come in will begin to go down, right? So scarcity is good. Limits are good
No,
because
I understand what you're saying. And what I would say is I definitely want a system that selects great people that are productive, not average people that speak English. I think there's a huge English proficiency issue among graduate foreign students, I'll say. And so I'm totally fine with like qualitative limits, say like, yes, you actually, to get admitted to a graduate program, you need to take the TOEFL and get a certain score.
right. Unfortunately, there's
And
rampant
but I'll say at
I can
elite
tell you
institutions, they do make you take the GRE, and then you do need to get a top score to get there. So there's not a quality problem. I think the problem is about values. And I think the limits on enrollment are not going to change that. I think that because the reason that is happening has nothing to do with scarcity and everything to do with the values of the people who lead American higher education institutions, which are actually against the United States and pro-global. They're explicitly pro-global.
So keep in mind the limits I'm describing are not draconian. 15% of total enrollment seems like a very reasonable limit that would leave most institutions unaffected, but would alter our most selective institutions that are far above 15%. And again, scarcity is good because it provides incentives for due diligence on the part of universities to make sure that they're not bringing in people who will make problems for them. Now, you may think...
I think that they want to bring people...
No, I think you're misunderstanding who the they is here. So senior leaders at universities are not radicals. They are bland bureaucrats who are simply trying to figure out how to attract glory and revenue to their institutions. And they're very fearful of, so faculty can harass them, but they'll do things to avoid hassles. If you made them engage in due diligence about the students who are coming in, they would select the ones who are going to bring revenue and glory to their institutions and avoid heartaches and trouble. But if there's no limit, then they don't put energy.
So you think that at a leading institution,
and the U.S. government cannot vet 1.2 million people.
Well, it can. It definitely can. And it does. It vets much more because it does.
It's not very good at it. I mean, it's extremely hard.
I think President Trump showed that if you actually try, you do. The problem is people didn't try in many ways. And foreign students, it's not like they're committing crimes or anything in numbers.
It's not crimes that I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is the institutions that make the American political system successful and thrive over time.
You mean ideological vetting?
Yes,
yeah,
right.
I mean, I'm in favor of that, and they're doing it. They're social media vetting now.
Right, but the students are smart. They know this, so
I'm not sure. I think many of them have proved that they're caught, and in fact, all of the people who have been problematic have been obvious cases that could have been caught.
Right, and look, there will be the Trump administration will end.
Absolutely, but then. But that's the policy question that we need to codify, where I agree with you. We need ideological vetting.
If we can institute reasonable limits like 15%.
But that is not a quantity limit, the issue, though.
So in 2008, we had just under 700,000 F1 visas, okay? And now we have 1.2 as of 2024, okay? And universities functioned very well. We had really top talent. They were impressive institutions producing advances in knowledge. And so it's not obvious that...
But the issue wouldn't be for you.
And if 1.2 is, why not 1.8? Or why not 3.8? What limit would there be?
It's not going to go up to 3.8. That's not the question. In fact, no. I mean, demographically, the entire world is aging. There's going to be a smaller supply of even people to want to come to America, and there's a smaller supply of Americans.
If there's no limit on F1 visas,
there's already no limit.
There are over 7 billion people in the world. the people with resources and minimal talent to enroll in a U.S. university.
But Jay, we're not talking about
That
hypothetical. That's already the case. There are already more than 8 billion people in the world. There are already people with resources, and we don't have millions of people doing so.
We had a 75% increase between 2008 and 2024 in the number of F1 visas. So at that rate of increase, there's nothing slowing it down. There's that at that rate of increase, you could have, and mind you, U.S. universities are also experiencing a birth dearth among U.S. children, right? So they're going to increasingly want to make up for the loss of the American students,
that is true,
because of the birth dearth, by importing more foreigners. So they're going to go up in American universities, including in state universities in Alabama.
Now you understand that if it doesn't go up, then we're going to lose hundreds of thousands of jobs, right? Because these universities are going to close.
We have gross overinvestment in higher education. Some shrinkage in that industry might be a healthy correction.
Well, but I don't know if you want to say overinvestment, but this is foreign money paying for it. So if we don't do that, then people
not foreign money. Remember,
especially small towns.
A lot of them are receiving stipends. They're being paid, right? They're not. So they are consuming now.
Yeah, the PhD students, but that's not the overwhelming majority of graduate students, which is master's students paying for it.
They're not the majority of graduate students.
Master's students are the majority of graduate students.
They are. But remember, they then work at their universities again as cheap labor because they need to have the money to pay for that. And the only place they can work is at their universities.
But you consider yourself, it's only 22% of the staff. 78% of the staff is
22% of professors. But increasingly, professors are a tiny part of universities. They're populated by all these other people who are the helpers and gophers and assistants and so on, and they're foreigners.
We should look in the stats of this because that's not what I've seen.
So there are 4 million total people who work in higher education in the U.S. Okay, and net job growth in higher education has been very meager. For the last 2 decades, it's about 10,000 a year of new jobs being created in net new jobs in higher education, and recently it's begun to shrink. Okay, yet the number of H-1B visas being offered by universities is now 16,000 a year. So we are hiring more foreigners than we create new jobs.
What do you think is well? That's not really then more foreigners because there's people who leave the university too that you're not counting there in the H-1B thing. That's the number. That's the inflow. You're not counting
the flow. That's the flow.
Yeah. So you're comparing net flow versus just inflow there. So that's why it's and oranges. But the truth is, if we reduce the number of foreign students by hundreds of thousands, American colleges would close. And that would mean firing the American workers too. And the problem is not even just about the colleges that I have. In fact, I don't think colleges are the main problem. I think the problem will be the rest of the economy that will lose the people that are selected into employment-based visas.
I don't think we should be we should no more protect jobs in American universities.
I'm not saying they need a privilege, but what you're saying is to limit them, to destroy them through government policy.
No, we should have as many as we need for their purpose in America. And their purpose is to train the future leaders of our country economically and culturally and governmentally. And that's what we need them for.
I mean, I agree. I just don't agree with a cap with an arbitrary number.
I'm just trying to think of what's the tipping point where the intellectual exchange, where the cultural exchange goes from us exporting our values to other countries to other countries importing their values into our elite. And I'd say about 15% is probably a tipping point. Look, I mean, it is arbitrary. If you said 12 or 10, I'd be happy to. When I was enrolled in college, it was very common in selective universities to have between 5 and 10% of their enrollment from abroad. So in a matter of
most universities are 10%. Most universities are 5 to 10%.
That's right. That's right. But in our most selective institutions that are the
But
ones
but you
producing.
mentioned that your problem is with the grad programs, not the total enrollment. So I mean, it just feels like this is a big hammer with a very arbitrary number when our entire problem
I'm
is
happy to haggle
actually the
over the
values of a few people,
I,
and we need
I'm
to
happy
filter
to
out.
haggle over the details, but the direction I think we might agree on, which is at some point you have to place limits to prevent the globalization of the American university and therefore the global orientation of the future leaders of America. That
So
we
I
want
would
them to
say,
be American
yeah,
in their orientation, that in their values, in what political systems they care about. We want them to have this natural affection more for America and the American political system than for other
yeah.
values and political systems. So I mean, we, and it's not that foreigners are unable to do that. They can, but they're just less likely to, much less likely to
Yeah.
than those from this country.
Well,
And
especially the ones that want to leave.
yeah, I understand. I'm not anti-immigrant. I think there are benefits to immigrants. I'm fully on board for that. But there also have to be limits to balance the benefits of the immigrants against the risks. And
Okay,
the
so
risk of the globalization of the American university is not an abstract risk. It's one that's right in front of our eyes.
I agree that there's a great risk of the globalization. In fact, I don't think it's a risk. I think it already happened. But I don't think it has anything to do actually with the foreign
And
students.
I
I
have
think
done
it's
two,
all about
right.
the ideas of the people who lead American universities. I think it's all about woke ideology. And I don't think that any cap on foreign students would solve that. I think it would only harm the American economy. It will
So
cost us jobs. It will cost us valuable people.
Well, I should mention that I've done two empirical analyses. They're not causal, so I don't want to oversell them, but simply the correlation between the number of H-1B visa workers at universities, or the number of F-1 visas at universities, and the number of post-October 7th protests. Okay. And basically, in both cases, what you see is very strong correlation between those two. Now, again, I don't want to suggest this as proving
I
causation.
was going to say, you've
I,
seen the correlation about the tuition. It's about the tuition amount, right?
The,
You didn't
um,
see you didn't see that state universities versus private, the whole
so
thing.
I actually, for the H-1B analysis, I do it by cities. So there are multiple universities, some public, some private. The tuition varies. Some are graduate students who are not paying tuition. So just the number of H-1B visas, and the percent of the variance explained
Yeah,
the number of protests.
I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair at all. If you look at
Well,
Colombia, you know what percent of the people arrested at the encampment were affiliated with?
oh, right. They're not people with visas because they're not idiots. They know they
No,
don't.
no, but so okay. So then let's not say it's causation. I think really
No,
causation
no.
is
What they're doing is they're providing they're disarming the intellectual infrastructure or arming the intellectual
okay,
counterstructure
but this
that
is about
facilitates
we
those
had
protests.
most of the people arrested were not even people in the university, were Marxist activists from nonprofits outside the university who just targeted these universities because they're the elite
I
institution.
think we would be fooling ourselves if we don't see that there is a danger and that there are some foreign saboteurs, but there's also a lot of foreigners who they will make no effort to argue in their classes, including technical classes, that America is good, that American values are good, that the American political system is good. And so
Well, in my
these
experience, it's
post-October
very
7th
few people
protests
total who say
were not
that.
the post-October 7th protests were not just anti-Israel. They were anti-American,
I agree.
anti-capitalist, anti-Western, and that is the globalization of the American university. We are
No, so
witnessing it.
that's where I disagree. So I absolutely agree with you about the ideas about the need to reject what happened after October 7th, the protests, the riots, really, the takeover of property, and the horrible anti-Western, third worldist things they bring. I don't think that's about foreign students. I think there's a few that are very bad that we want to filter out. But I think that the overwhelming majority, in fact, at a lower rate, they were involved because they were on visas than the native born. So this is an education problem. We have a huge education problem in America that we're scapegoating right now on foreign students.
So I think there's a reason why we have borders and limits on visas at all, right? Because we're balancing benefits against risks, okay? And while America is very attractive to foreigners, we know that the rate of foreigners in general that we let into America has to be at some limited number so that we can properly digest them, to Americanize them as they come in. And over time, they become wonderful citizens and contributors to America, but only at a digestible rate. If we overwhelm our assimilation institutions or those institutions break down, then we have a problem. And that's generally true about why we have borders and limits on immigration at all. It's specifically true for universities where they're especially important for training the future leaders of America, and where we have zero limits. We have no limits on coming in. And therefore, my suggestion that we have some limits, I think is a reasonable place to balance benefits and risks.
I have to jump in here because we are now at time. So we could go on for another 30 minutes. We could go on for another 60 minutes. We could go on forever on this. You guys are both very passionate and informed about your topic, but I need to turn us to the closing statements. And in reverse order, that means Jay will go first for 2 minutes, and Daniel, you will have the final word.
Great, thank you. And look, it was wonderful chatting with Daniel. I've never had a chance to speak with him directly, and I enjoy it thoroughly and look forward to future such exchanges. And I think that we share a lot of common ground. I think that we both recognize the benefits that immigrants bring to this country in general, and specifically in higher education. And so I think it's important that we not throw away those benefits. But at the same time, there's a reason why we have borders, why we have limits on immigration in general, and why specifically they should exist in universities too, which is that in excessive numbers, the cultural composition and the values and priorities of institutions change. And while the F1 visa program was a great program in its early days for exporting American values to other countries, that intellectual exchange, that cultural exchange has inverted. And that's because the numbers have become overwhelming, particularly among foreign graduate students at universities who are basically the staff running those universities. And so if we want to protect against the globalization of the American university and the problems that poses for training future American elites, then we have to impose some reasonable caps on the number of F1 visas we issue, the number of H1B visas that universities can sponsor, and also the use of the OPT, or optional practical training program, at universities for altering the composition, the staff and the students at those universities. And I think that at some theoretical point, Daniel must agree that that has to be true. I guess maybe we have some difference about whether empirically we're there or not, but I think we can just look at the world and see that day is upon us, that we have to begin to balance those risks.
Thank you, Jay. And Daniel, the last word is yours.
Well, likewise, Jay, this was great. I would say I think we're missing out on a lot of benefits from immigration because of existing restrictions on the path of foreign students to stay in the United States. We see it in the case of actually TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductors, who was actually a PhD student here, which was very difficult to stay. And I think that the problems of higher education are not caused by foreign enrollment, are caused by the Marxist ideology that has been taken over academia since the 60s, when foreign enrollment was almost none. So if we're going to fix the problems of academia, we need to get at the heart of the problem, not at the symptoms of the problem. And then we're actually harming ourselves if we impose more limits on migration, especially high-skilled migration, which is what foreign students are, which are immigrants who speak the language, who have job offers. We want to make it easier for them to definitely get out of academia, That's for sure. We have too many limits that lead them to stay in academia. And because of that, we're missing on the innovation, on the entrepreneurship of so many founders of potential large companies, right? People forget Elon Musk was also somebody who came here on an H-1B visa, who was also a student here, then dropped out. That was the case even of Jensen Huang. So there are a lot of important cases that if we just impose a broad brush and say we're just going to limit the total number, we're not getting either at the problem, and we're actually missing out on a lot of the potential benefits. So I don't want us to go in a misguided direction. We want to stop communists. We want to stop Islamists. We want to stop everybody who hates the United States, and even people who don't speak English from coming to the United States. But that doesn't mean we're going to just limit the percent to this X arbitrary percent, or we're going to just stop these certain universities from employing people. It's about lifting restrictions on the good kind of people and imposing those on the wrong kind of people.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Jay, and thank you, listeners. Please join me again in 2 weeks when Conservative Crossroads will return. The topic is, should conservatives back tax increases? Orrin Cass says yes, Grover Norquist says no. Take care.